I think all the things that happen to us internally when we develop protectors and that kind of thing, or when we internalize others who have been wonderful for us and also hurtful for us, they're all there because, what do I say? They're the substrate of the reality of our life. And I don't want to get rid of any part of my life. What I want to do is be with it in a healing way. And so if I can, let's say I have a protector who's really judgmental of others. I could really want to get rid of that protector because I don't want to be judgmental of people. But if instead I can say to that protector, what would I have to feel if you stepped back? If you weren't providing these judgments that protect me from being vulnerable inside, what would I have to feel? I'm willing to feel whatever's necessary to do that. Then the judgmental part of me doesn't have to, once the healing has happened underneath there, that judgmental part is going to recede because it's not needed as much anymore. But if I reject it and I push it away, I'm not just pushing it away, I'm also pushing away a part of myself that needs healing. It's like, I don't want to hear from any of you guys. So I can't really heal inside if I'm not willing to welcome in whatever's there by way of protectors, by way of painful parts and all of that. So it's really important to me to trust that all of this is adaptive. None of this is bad. It was an adaptation to circumstance.
Okay, Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so I've heard you say that we're organized to be protected until the possibility of healing arrives. Can you maybe expand on this and its relevance for attachment?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have experiences in life that are hurtful for us. Even if you're securely attached, there certainly have been moments where there's been something painful and nobody was there to really comfort you, or something that really scared you, and all of that kind of thing. And we also just sometimes accumulate wounds over time. Like if we're around somebody who shames us a lot, it may not look like a big thing from from incident to incident, but it accumulates and leaves this sense that there's something wrong with us inside. So those are just some examples. So the way that we are put together is that we're going to at some point need to heal those things, but until someone is there who can support us in doing that, we need to have ways that keeps these painful things not up in our awareness all the time, or we don't function very well. So fortunately, there's actually a particular, when there's traumatic experience involved, there's a particular chemical called extrasynaptic GABA that gets released that helps these memories stay out of conscious awareness and out of our embodied experience, and helps keep them kind of in the subcortical in the body, but not where we're aware of them all the time. And we also develop protective other ways that my word for them is protectors. They've probably been called defenses and things like that for a long time, but I think the word protector is more accurate, so that we learn ways of behaving and ways of experiencing the world that, again, don't expose us to having these traumas be up in our awareness all the time. So for me, my best protector when I was a kid were two things. One was reading. I could get myself so deeply into a book that I literally would not hear somebody next to me saying my name, and I would just go live in the book rather than in my life, which wasn't very good when I was young. And the other thing is, if I could read with a cookie in my hand, then I got the sugar to also help me with the feelings of warmth and goodness, which, especially if it's a chocolate cookie, stimulates these neurotransmitters that allow us to feel kind of held and cared for. So sweet food and reading were two for me. And I'm an introvert, so those were really natural ways for me to have some protection from these traumatic memories that were always looming in the background, but that I didn't have to be aware of.
Now, I'm aware you've spent decades of work, healing your inner community, as you call it. Can you remember what your internal subjective experience was like before you did this work compared to what it's like now?
Oh yeah, I really can. I was very split apart inside because I had two parents who were quite mentally ill, and I have all the compassion in the world for them. I know they gave me the only experience they had available to them. So that's one way it's very different than it was before. My inner subjective experience of my inner internalized parents was one of fear, one of wanting to be away from them, wanting to not have to keep feeling what it was like to be around them, like there was this needing to be distant. And over again decades of work, some of which included things like sand tray and collage and art and those kinds of things, as well as care from two very extraordinary therapists where I would, had their care and support to feel safe enough to go into these places. To now I honestly can say I don't any longer feel a need to stay separate from those inside who are harmful to me, because when you do the deeper work, also their inner world gets healed. And I know that can sound odd, but when we internalize somebody, which is how our inner community is formed, we take people in through mirror neuron resonance and all kinds of ways. When we take them in, they become part of us. And as we take them in, we take in the way they hurt us, but also the pain inside of them that caused them to do the hurt. And so there's a way we can touch their inner world inside of us and have a really deep kind of healing. And so I think about my parents now, and in addition to kind of compassionate understanding, I also don't feel the magnitude of how they wounded me any longer. It's just not there. So I can feel comfortable around, thinking of them, being with them inside, because there's been healing not only of my wounds, but also of the way that the wounds in them that caused them to hurt me. And I know that's saying a lot. I mean, it's hard to kind of take that in if it's an unfamiliar idea. So feel free to ask more questions about it if you want, because I know this is a big topic and sometimes a little hard to grasp at first.
I think we'll come back to this in a bit. What kind of is coming to mind for me is that, because you have done that work on your inner community and really, heal yourself from within, you've become a presence in the world that is sort of transmitting that kind of healing presence onto others, and it's having like a ripple effect out into everybody you interact with, including everybody that listens to this interview. So it's really worth taking the time to do this, whatever, how long, ever long it takes.
It would be my wish, because I think there's intergenerational healing as well as hurting, and that's the gifts that were given me by these two therapists in particular, and lots of other people as well. Certainly my wife and others have been so tender with me, and all of that, because we don't heal ourselves very easily. We heal best. What's most natural is to heal in relationship, where we're held without judgment and without agenda, so that we are able to sink into these places and then receive that care right at the heart of the wound. That to me is what therapy and healing in general, just in friendship or wherever we're doing it, is all about.
It strikes me that a lot of people nowadays are really struggling to find sort of like their purpose, like why am I here? Like, what am I on this earth for? And to me, that's a really good North Star, what we're talking about here, because if you can disrupt that intergenerational wounding and trauma that has been passed on from generation to generation, like not only are you helping yourself, you're also helping everybody that comes after you. You're breaking a long chain of destruction there, and that's what could be better than that?
Absolutely. I think some of the sweetest things, and I had an agency in California for about 17 years. And when we would be fortunate enough to have couples come in even and work together before they had children and take these intergenerational legacies of so much pain that had come to them and do the healing work and then be able to provide so much more security for their kids. I think that made us happier than anything else, was when we got to be part of breaking that intergenerational chain of pain, that just goes back and back and back.
Something I want to go back to, Bonnie. We are just talking there at the start about, we're organized to be protected until the possibility of healing arrives. Now, during COVID-19, I moved to a new city for a university degree, and just as I had moved, all of the lockdowns, everything just came in, right? So I didn't know barely anybody. So I'm in this new city, I'm socially isolated. And around that time, I developed, like, I got really rigid around like routines. Like, I'll have to get up at a certain time of the day, I have to do everything like lunch would have to be at 1 o'clock, whatever it was. This was like how I kind of created a sense of security and safety around that time. And this was just something I just was just doing as sort of like a defense or whatever. And then it was only when I started to get back into like the right social context and I had people around me that I could trust and all the rest, that started to sort of relax and everything, you know. But what the question for you is here, you know, if someone is in that situation where it might not necessarily be around routines or whatever, but they feel like they are being driven by protector parts, and that possibility doesn't feel like it's arrived yet. If it's not around them, they don't feel safe. What would you say to someone in that situation?
Yeah, I would certainly say that their system was being very wise to keep protecting them until enough safety does arrive. But that also that doesn't have to look a particular way. Like it doesn't have to look like you go to therapy. Although I mean, I'm a therapist. I think therapy is great, but not everybody has access to that. But it can be in the form of a friend, or it can even be in the form, say, of getting out in nature a little bit and beginning to relate to the natural world. There's so much beautiful research on forest bathing now, where you leave your phones and everything behind and go into nature, go into the forest and be in the quiet. And when you can do that, I think I can't remember the exact, like, is it a half hour, an hour? I don't know, but your blood pressure begins to go down a little bit. Your autonomic nervous system begins to calm. You get into a more ventral state and you begin to sense your interconnection with the natural world as well. Plus, there's this wonderful thing when we approach a tree, the tree senses our presence and sends out a little extra oxygen for us. There actually is a relationship there.
I was listening to an audiobook recently by a guy called Sad Guru. Sounds like a really sort of guru name, but it's actually a brilliant book. It's called Inner Engineering. And one of the things he recommends to do in that book is to sit in front of a tree or a plant and just really meditate on the fact that that tree is sending oxygen towards you. You're sending carbon dioxide towards it, I think. And there's an exchange going here. There's a relationship, you know?
And if you can get quiet enough, you can begin to sense that, like the tree has its own interiority, and it isn't like our thinking mind, but something's going on there that leads it to nourish all the trees around us, that has the impulse to nourish us. And there's so I think there's something genuinely, even if you can't sense that in a really tangible way, there is actually a relationship going on anyway that's can be the beginning of healing. I've worked with a lot of severe people with severe trauma all my whole life. I mean, that's what I my whole therapy life, because that's what I wanted to do, because I'd finally gotten help. And so that's when I became a therapist, when I'd gotten really good help. And I thought, gosh, if I could feel so totally differently, others might be able to do that too. And I would say probably at least 25% of the people I worked with severe trauma had survived because they could spend a lot of time out in nature. They were able to draw on that sense that there was something else, even though they couldn't say what it was most of the time, like they wouldn't know what it was, but they felt so much better when they were around nature. And they just go, I had two or three clients that say, I just climbed the tree in the backyard with my book and I'd sit there, most of the day in the summertime.
And it helps to create that sense of safety. And like I've heard you say quite a few times, this the Stephen Porges quote, safety is a biological imperative.
Right. And connection is a biological imperative. So if we can even connect with the natural world again, it begins to satisfy something. Or people will have an animal that's very meaningful for them. And that can also begin to provide a sense of safety. Pet your dog or your cat, and oxytocin, that chemical of trust and love, gets released in the body. And our animals are more trustworthy. They don't they, for the most part, just want to be with us. I don't know about cats so much because I've never had a cat. I was allergic to them, but I've had a lot of dogs. And their desire to just be present and loving is so consistent, so consistent that there's something very safe and soothing about that. Or horses are wonderful. Can be wonderful companions on the healing path. So there are other ways besides therapy, and sometimes our own history has made it so that it's hard for us to kind of choose safe people in our lives for a while. So there are other resources. And then eventually, hopefully, we find our way to some humans who can just be with us again without judgment, without agenda, and really listen deeply. And just simply being heard and witnessed is, to me and so many people I know, the heart of what's healing, much more than any kind of technique or anything else. Those other things can be helpful, but they work so much better again when the foundation of presence is there, true presence, you know.
It's a really shocking thing I find that whenever I'm speaking with someone and they're literally sitting listening to you with no agenda, no comments. They're just giving you their presence. It's the strangest thing. And whenever that is happening, I can't help but to open up. I just can't help myself. I just talk and talk and talk because it very rarely happens, you know. But it's the best gift you can give someone.
It really is, you know, and there's a whole bunch of people that know that and have talked about it. I mean, Carl Rogers, we kind of lost Carl Rogers in the rush of so many other, you know, people that bring forward theories and all of that, but he knew something about that. And there's a woman named Rachel Naomi Remen who's a doctor and also very much of a counselor and all of that. And she talks so extensively about this, about how the greatest gift we give people is our listening heart, where we don't need them to be any different than they are, and they feel fully accepted just as they are. Because that's what was missing in childhood for many of us. That's the attachment. Even in households that look like pretty much okay, often there's so much agenda, and a lot of that's cultural pressure, you know. There's so much agenda, there's so much being looked at with a critical eye, and it comes from parents being afraid that their kids won't be all right in the world if they aren't certain ways. So then that child doesn't get the opportunity very often to just feel fully seen and accepted and delighted in, which to me, all of those are the foundations of secure attachment and that sense of my, you know, that yeah, even on my worst day, I'm still a pretty good human being, you know, I'm still lovable, even when I've messed up, even when I've done all kinds of things, you know. Comes from a parent who the kid drags mud into the brand new kitchen floor, and the parent's like, oh my goodness, look what happened. Let's clean it up together. You must have been having a lot of fun out in the yard instead of getting mad. Makes all the difference in the world.
Definitely. With regards to what we were speaking earlier about, whenever I was talking about, you know, that experience during COVID-19 or whatever, and then you said the first thing I would do is I would thank your system for that time and thank it for everything it was doing to help protect you. And you know, there's kind of two views in the therapeutic community I find around this subject of this idea of whether all of these parts are essentially protected or they're essentially good because the underlying intention is to protect us. And there are some people in different parts that think that actually there are parts that are we might want to they are bad. We want to cast them out or whatever. Where do you stand on this? Do you think that it's all benevolent?
Well, I would first of all say if something is neurobiologically woven into us, good luck getting rid of it. You know, it's not going anywhere. We can try to do that. We can try to cover it over with, I don't know, affirmations or installing some other positive thing, but they're not actually going anywhere if they're part of our neurobiological makeup. So it definitely behooves us to befriend these parts and to begin to invite them to show us who it is inside they're protecting. So my reading self, and which was largely positive, I think, but my cookie eating self, not necessarily largely positive. You know, I've actually had issues with my weight my whole life around this and continue to see it though as if I'm particularly craving sweets, like somebody inside is needing something. And I may still eat the sweets, but I also am going toward whoever it is that's hurting or scared inside. So I do see it as essential, first of all, not thinking about good or bad, but it's essential. If I have a protector, something's going on inside of me. So it's an essential kind of arrow pointing to, can I have the safety of the people around me and my environment to begin to really inquire, like, who's hurting and scared inside that I suddenly have this big craving for sweets? So it gets scary for people though to think of it this way. I think when we realize that addictions of all sorts, cookies are relatively less hurtful unless I have diabetes or something than say if it's heroin. Now we're looking at a life destroying kind of protection. But I think what I've learned the most going through all these years with people is that when the protector is big, even and destructive like that, that tells me a lot about the amount of pain and fear the person is carrying, that they need this enormous and destructive protector to even begin to help them feel safe in the world, even though it's very temporary and it continues to degrade their overall life. The belief inside is that getting in touch with what the pain and fear is would be worse than this. And I'm saying that from the viewpoint of Bruce Ecker's work, where he talks about this, that the proportion of the magnitude of, he wouldn't use the word protector, but of what he would call the symptom, but the protector is exactly proportionate to the fear of what's inside of ourselves that feels like it would kill us literally if it came up. It feels like it could deal a blow to us that we could not stand. So I come from that place that the protectors are trying to show us something, even the ones that are also causing harm at the same time. I guess I go back to, so we could say the ultimate protector, the ultimate threat of the protector is suicide, taking the life. It's better to die, or at least think about dying, than it is to face what's on the inside. And so I again have great respect for that protector as far as telling me something about that. But what I know is if I can make a really solid connection with somebody through listening to that protector and saying this is telling us something, that you feel you want to die, is telling us something really important about the magnitude of the wound inside of you, I will be here with you. We will do this together. And I'm talking to that protector and saying, maybe you don't have to exert this kind of protection because I'll be here. This person will not be alone anymore with this pain. I will be here. And then often the protector begins to be able to settle a little bit and withdraw the threat, whatever it is. So yes, I do see them all as having an essential role. And it's not mine to judge good or bad. I don't think it's mine to be present with what this protector is telling us. And when people begin to understand that if they have these big and dangerous protectors, that that's talking about something inside of them, something begins to shift. And because it's the truth, I really do believe that's the truth. And I think when they begin to take in that truth, then we begin to get into relationship with the protector and ask for the protector's help to let us be with what's inside. But that can only happen if we really can be present with that. If we're going to try to boss around this experience, it doesn't work. We have to be open to being present to the protector and present to whatever's underneath there, including some pretty horrendous things often. And often we'll go back really early. I mean, if we've had very difficult experience very early in life, then everything that happens to us afterwards is harder because we have this backlog of pain that goes back to maybe infancy, maybe in utero. I mean, we're learning more and more about how much development happens in utero. And we're learning more about epigenetics and what we're carrying from previous generations as well through cellular memory. That was a lot.
No, just a reflection. I for me, a protector part would be that would show up regularly enough is frantic busyness, like just getting really busy, and it's quite a stressful state. And a habit I've got into recently, I'm trying to do it more and more, is whenever I notice that happening, I just put a timer on my phone for 5 minutes and I just stop what I'm doing and I just sit and I just like whatever that, and then I'll sit and then I'll literally, I can feel the pain in my body. I can feel like a particular part in my stomach and I'll just sit with what that is and I'll just send the intention where basically like I'm here with you and, just sending a bit of love to whatever that is. And it like it's not that the pain goes away, but there's a different thing happens inside, and I slow down, and the rushing stops, and it actually really helps. And what do you think might be happening there? Like, do you think because I've heard people say that whenever you do this, you sort of you're getting more curious about what's happening. And then I've also heard people say that whenever you enter a curious state, you're activating more of the prefrontal cortex and less of the sort of maybe older parts of the brain. Like, what do you think might be going on there?
Well, I think that's going on. Yes, certainly that's going on. If we slow down and we make room for certain kinds of things, we that sense of curiosity. I would in when I've been writing, I call that the caring observer, but that it's the part of us that's capable if if it is has been wired in enough by the help of usually somebody else, it does bring on this is Dan Siegel's hand model. If people are familiar with that, this is the amygdala, which is where that agitation is. It's going on in the whole body, like you're saying. You feel it really in your belly. You feel it there. But all that information comes up and kind of collects in the amygdala. And when we have had enough help and support, and we can begin to focus on curiosity, what's happening is this prefrontal cortex right here is literally wrapping around and holding the amygdala. But first, somebody has to help us develop this enough so we have a caring observer, which you do, because you can do that. Lots of people can't do that, that I, on the outside, say as the therapist, need to be their caring observer for a while before it gets wired into their brain. And they're also internalizing me. So me inside of them is also part of the caring observer. They can feel in an ongoing way held by another as well as their brain is doing part of the work. And so so what we're really, the way I would say it, rather than if I were talking to somebody about it, where we weren't talking specifically about the brain, I'd say we're getting into relationship with whatever's going on in the belly. We're getting in when we go there and we say, I'm here, which is basically what you're saying. I'm here. I'm listening. We're getting into relationship, and that's what's been missing. And that's probably why your belly's hurting, because something happened maybe long ago. Something's happening now. You're caught up in all this busyness, which in and of itself is traumatic for our system. It's not how we're meant to operate. So when we slow down and we get into relationship and say, I'm here, we're doing healing work. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're saying, I'm here, I'll listen to you. I can't stay longer than 5 minutes right now, but I'll listen to you for that. And I find it really helpful to put my hands if it's up here or down in the belly, as again, a gesture to the very cells of my body. I've slowed down. I'm listening to you. Here's some warmth from my hands as well as from my attention.
I love that. I'm going to add that in the hands as well. Okay, so something else I was really curious to ask you about in this interview, Bonnie. How does our image of God influence our attachment patterns and overall well-being in life, would you say?
Well, I'd say it the other way around. I'd say that our attachment patterns influence our view of God.
Okay, okay.
Because when parents are brand new, and when we're brand new and we're brand new with our parents, it's a godlike relationship. I mean, our brains are incredibly immature. They are totally, our system is just all focused on finding the best warm attachment we can when we're born. There's all kinds of ways that we know that our system wants to reach out. Um, the sympathetic without fear branch of the autonomic nervous system is more active early on because it encourages us to reach out. That's not sympathetic fight flight. That's just the movement outward as opposed to a more inward kind of movement. So there's all kinds of ways that our systems are set up because, again, connection is a biological imperative. And so here we are, we're reaching out and we really want and need that connection with the other person. And then what comes back to us begins to shape us in an enormous way as far as our optimism about being able to have connection or not have connection. But the focus is so totally, usually first on mom for a period. If this is available, if this what is available, the person who's carried me in their body is the one I want to continue with. So I begin to focus on that. And if there is a lot of warmth and security and connection, it makes it much easier when I'm older to imagine that God, who I can't see and isn't tangible, is also that way. That there is a lovingness and a closeness possible because of that. On the other hand, if I what I meet is, say, a very distraught parent in some way, or a very distant parent who's just kind of learned how to diaper me and feed me and all that, but doesn't have much capacity for connection, then there's a much more likely chance that regardless of what I think about God, how I will feel God is also distant or somehow punitive or whatever. Now, it's not like a one-to-one correlation kind of thing at all. And all sorts of things happen in our relationship with God or the divine, but there is certainly a lot of pretty good research that some of these tendencies for how we actually experience God are often rooted in how we experienced our parents when we were very, very small.
And how do you experience God or the divine now in your life, would you say?
Oh, well, I had the very good fortune of having rather, I had, well, I could go way back. My grandfather was a kind of mystic, so I got some things from him initially about there's more here than meets the eye, I guess we could say. So I had that foundation. And then I spent 17 years at a yoga center that was more dedicated to meditation than doing the postures. Like, we did the yoga postures to quiet enough to meditate. I was terrible at it. My mind was busy. I'd had no healing. My mind was very invested in me not having any actual experience because it would have probably opened up the trauma, and I had no support for that. So I was terrible at meditation, probably like the worst, but I still think that there was some very profound experiences that I was exposed to and I was absorbing while I was there with this group of people. So there's that layer. And then the next thing that happened was I got into therapy and I did 5 years of really intense, painful therapy twice a week, dealing with the trauma. That I think began to make my inner world solid enough so that it wasn't just like any kind of spiritual experience just ran through it like through a sieve because I was so fragmented before. So that laid, I think, the foundation. And then finally, in my early 60s, I was fortunate enough to spend 3.5 years of very intense work one-on-one with a spiritual teacher. And that is what really began to open it up. So as a little old lady, I began to have much more of a continual experience, I would say, of God's love and care and tenderness and that kind of thing.
And would you be willing to share what that work with that lady involved over those that
Well, that was with a man, actually. He was a craniosacral person. And so we were doing work on the table, having conversation too. But I think there's something inside of me because however it is, whether it's my soul or whatever it is, I've always attachment and connection has always been the most important thing to me from the time I was very little. And I think I needed to have a one-on-one relationship with someone in order to really get safe and quiet enough to allow what I believe is there for all of us all the time and sense of being cared for and all of that. I do believe it's the nature of the universe that that's what this is built out of is this sense of love, not in the cheesy sort of way, but this sense of deep holding and care, I think, is really the nature of the universe waiting for us to be able to be present to it.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So the nature of the work was quiet and cranial kind of work where you're just together, really, that just practicing deep, deep, deep presence. So I feel so fortunate.
I would totally agree as well with what you're saying about, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but like just the fundamental nature of the world we live in seems to be relational. Like that seems to be number one. Yesterday I was at a friend's wedding I went to university with, and I seen old friends that I hadn't seen in like years, and there was loads of like at the end of the night, loads of hugging, like goodbyes and stuff. And to me, that was the really real. That was the realest thing. I was like afterwards, I was like, oh my God, like that was just one of the best experiences I had in so long. And I was like, that's the thing that I need to have at the top of my value hierarchy is these really strong, deep relationships. Everything else should be subordinate to that, you know?
Well, and that's where we start in life. The thing that matters is that early relationship. Is someone there who sees me, who can be present with me, who delights in me, who's interested in who I actually am and not trying to form me into something I'm not. That's the foundation of all of this. So I think you're right. And then we circle back and we think, who are the people? I hadn't seen this couple that I really, really like, but they live at the opposite end of the United States. We don't see each other often. We text every once in a while, but it's not regular. And as soon as we were together, after not being together for maybe 10 years, it was like no time had passed. We just picked up right in the heart, right where we left off maybe 10 years ago, because there's such a profound bond, even if we're not making regular outside contact. And we all said, all of us said, this is so wonderful, this is so right, right where we left off. So yeah, they are wonderful. And then we carry those, obviously, the three of us had been carrying that relationship inside of us all this time. It was thriving and feeding all three of us, that we could pick up right where we left off with such a wonderful feeling of connection. So these don't go away. They're in here. Your friends have been in here all that time.
Um, Maybe this would be a good place to bring in the work of Marco Iacoboni and this idea that we actually internalize each other, which I think is beautiful. Do you want to maybe share a bit about that?
Oh yeah, I love Marco's work. He was building on the discoveries about mirror neurons with monkeys that were discovered accidentally. I love the story because the researchers had gone out and had left whatever they were feeding the monkeys that they were working with. And so they came back in, and the monkey was wired up to be able to see responses in the brain. And so one of the researchers like picked up the raisin or the peanut or whatever it was and ate it, and noticed that the monkey's brain looked like it was eating the peanut. And that's where mirror neurons came from. It's like, well, he's not eating it, I am. And so they figured it was faulty wiring or something. So then they went about replicating it to say, like, oh my gosh, these monkeys have the capacity to have an experience that they are not physically having right now if they've had it before. So those became mirror neurons. If they see somebody else doing it, their brain does it as well. So Marco became very interested if this was true for humans, and his research was with humans. And until recently, you can't just go in and probe a human brain. We don't ethically allow ourselves to do that. I'm not sure why we allow it with monkeys either, frankly, but we do. So, but they can't do that, but they could see through, again, the kind of way that we've we used to have to take the pictures so that you could see where the blood flow was, and where blood flow increased, presumably that was where there was more neural firing. Well, now they've been able to do some research where patients have because they're having severe seizures, they open the skull and you can have access to a human brain with a person who's just having regular experience, laying in a hospital bed, waiting to have a seizure so they can see exactly where it is to take care of it. And they have asked some of these patients if it would make their stay there more meaningful if the scientists were able to also look at certain things. And so now we do have neuron to neuron studies of mirror neurons in the brain, and have discovered they're all over our brains. That seems like some portion of most areas of the brain have these mirroring capacities where we share experience with each other. So that if I'm doing something, you are too. But if I have a sad face, you've been sad at some time. So the neurons in your brain will light up for sadness. And it's what gives us empathy, because now we're having the same experience. And at the same time, I'm also taking you in and encoding you inside of me. My neurons are firing for your bodily experience, your emotional experience, your intention toward me. Are you feeling well disposed toward me, or are you wanting to hurt me? And so much more. And meanwhile, my senses are also picking up and encoding at the same time what you look like, what you sound like, maybe what you smell like. If I'm a baby and I'm gnawing on mom's fingers, what you taste like. All the senses are picking up what they can. And you wind up with a very, very thorough internalization of the other person, of both their inner world, their emotions, their bodily sensations, and also, connected with what you look like and sound like and all of that. So then I can go inside to my inner Nile and I can say, in this interaction, I can sense what I was feeling and I can also sense what you were feeling if I go in and touch that image of you. So we're not meant to be alone, obviously, right? I mean, our whole system is devoted to making sure we're not left alone.
It's just such a mind-blowing idea when you really wrap your head around that. The implications of that are quite shocking. But the thing that comes to mind for me here is we form this internal representation of somebody, usually maybe the first time we meet them or whatever, right? And then does that, or a bit of it, yeah. And then does that become then almost a model that exists in our mind that we might then, in subsequent interactions, project that onto them? So then in the future, we might not actually see the person fully. We're seeing our representation, our representation of that model that we at first internalized, which can be a problem because if that first interaction is not positive, maybe that is not a good thing, you know?
Well, it could, I mean, certainly it could be that way. And we do take in people who harm us too. I mean, that is part of the healing that we talked about at the very beginning of our talk here today, that because they're in there, we can be able to begin to heal the experience from their viewpoint as well. But I hear what you're saying, but the words that I don't think of it as a model or a representation. I think of it as the person is in there. And yes, the person is in there. Maybe it was rude to me the first time we met because they were having a bad day or whatever. But the next time I meet them, yes, I might project that on them, but I'm also encoding the new experience. So if they're kind and loving or funny or whatever that day, I'm also encoding that. And what I begin to get is a more and more rounded sense of who this person is through a multitude of interactions. I mean, imagine how complex those internalizations are of our parents, for example, or whoever raised us, whoever we were with day in and day out, or your college roommate who you had all kinds of experiences with, or a teacher. Even 9 months of a teacher gets in there pretty big, pretty strong. And again, often very complex because the teacher can come in grumpy, scared, sad, happy, joyous, curious, encouraging. And all of that is part of it because even if we have a viewpoint of the person and we're projecting that, we're still having a new experience, and that's encoding as well. So it isn't like it's determinative unless we just decide to stay away from the person completely because that first experience was so unpleasant. Then we're going to have that permanently as the way the person is.
I remember when I started meditating when I was probably around 20 or so. And around that time I was working with someone that not to criticize her, but they were quite a negative person and they were always like just quite negatively aggressive. And I was meditating one night and then I could literally hear like the playback from the interactions that day going on in my mind. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm internalizing this person. This person is becoming part of me here. This is not healthy, So that just popped in mind there now.
Well, but here's the healthy part of it, though. This is the healthy part of it. If that person becomes a really loud voice, I have somebody I saw for a number of years, and her father continually said the same denigrating phrase to her over and over and over again. And so in her head, she would hear this all the time. So that can sound really negative, but we were able to go into that in her inner world where obviously this father was still living and say, what's hurting you or scaring you that you need to be so critical of your daughter? And by sitting with that inner him, which isn't just some static representation, it's a very much the feeling of the living person is in there saying this phrase. We were able finally to kind of sink down to the child part of him and also to his war experience. He had PTSD from the war. and begin to, with the inner father. Now, this doesn't in any way change the outer father necessarily, but the inner father could feel the comfort we were bringing, and that phrase began to just not be there anymore. Because we were touching the pain and the fear and the terrible tragedy of his experience in the war in a way that comforted him. And so this inner father no longer needed to hammer away at her. So it is healthy to have it happen. But you have to be wanting to go in and help these other parts, these intergenerational parts that we've now internalized, or this was it a teacher, professor?
It was someone I worked with.
Somebody you worked with, yes. Yeah. So if you were to go to him inside and ask him what's hurting you or scaring you that you need to come at me this way. These days, I also say to that person, I trust you have a good heart, so something must be hurting you or scaring you that you need to behave in this way. I want to help.
Yeah, definitely.
It's helped me so much with my own parents. That those parents no longer feel threatening to me inside because their inner children have received years of comfort at this point.
And is this what we're talking about whenever you speak about radical inclusiveness? Is this the same idea? Do you want to maybe expand on what that is and how that is relevant for what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think all the things that happen to us internally when we develop protectors and that kind of thing, or when we internalize others who have been wonderful for us and also hurtful for us, they're all there because, what do I say? They're the substrate of the reality of our life. And I don't want to get rid of any part of my life. What I want to do is be with it in a healing way. And so if I can, let's say I have a protector who's really judgmental of others. I could really want to get rid of that protector because I don't want to be judgmental of people. But if instead I can say to that protector, what would I have to feel if you stepped back? If you weren't providing these judgments that protect me from being vulnerable inside, what would I have to feel? I'm willing to feel whatever's necessary to do that. Then the judgmental part of me doesn't have to, once the healing has happened underneath there, that judgmental part is going to recede because it's not needed as much anymore. But if I reject it and I push it away, I'm not just pushing it away, I'm also pushing away a part of myself that needs healing. It's like, I don't want to hear from any of you guys. So I can't really heal inside if I'm not willing to welcome in whatever's there by way of protectors, by way of painful parts and all of that. So it's really important to me to trust that all of this is adaptive. None of this is bad. It was an adaptation to circumstance. So to me, that's one of the most important things that relational neuroscience has taught me, is that everything that's developed inside of us is adaptive to conditions. Nothing happens randomly. Nothing happens in a way that's intended to hurt. These are adaptive experiences. And so if I can receive them that way, then I can welcome all of this. I read Rumi's Guest House in class to everybody all the time because that's its main message. Welcome the mean thought, welcome all of these things because they're trying, he says they're a gift from beyond. I would say they're from beyond, but also from within because they're the pathway to healing and the pathway to, I hope, a kinder planet.
That's beautiful. And whenever you're having this dialogue with this part of yourself, Bonnie, are you like asking the question internally? Are you writing that down? What form does that take? And then what form does the answer take too?
Yeah. Well, I sometimes will write it down. Sometimes I'm just being with that part inside myself. I get a sense, like right now, there's a sand tray out in the other room that I've been working on for a week, where I have been adding things to it as I feel called to do it. There's a collage card that emerged. So often I get my answers through something, just an impulse inside, like, go look at the sand tray shelves. The answer is there. So this whole kind of thing has happened over the last week and a half or so. And now it feels like it's kind of come to a conclusion. So now I'm ready to take that sand tray and put the things back on the shelf. But I feel like a lot has been touched inside of me. And it came about because I had an experience of getting really scared one day for reasons I had no idea why. I just felt very frightened. So I thought, well, I can't get at this by thinking about it. And I really just felt that kind of sense, go look at the shells, it'll unfold. And it did over time. And now I feel much more settled inside. So I get my answers that way, but everybody does it differently. Some people find journaling is like the richest possible experience they can have. And I've shared all this with my wife day by day too. So I'm always wanting to bring in support. It's so important to have support. Support is so essential because when we feel safe in that lovely hold being held kind of way by somebody else, just exactly what you said earlier, you can't stop talking. Your inner world so wants to be heard that it's like, and so it's the same with this, that there's parts of me that want to be heard, and it's really important, and I can deepen so much better when I'm sharing it. So we crave I mean, in a technical way, it's like taking two nervous systems, and 1 plus 1 is way more than two. When you have another nervous system supporting you, it isn't just that the two have added together, but a kind of a whole universe of safety opens where we're free to become vulnerable. And then with vulnerability comes the possibility of healing. So yeah. So I do it all different ways, just depending on how I'm moved around inside. I try to listen. I think if anything has happened to me over the years that's most important is that I've learned what you said earlier, slow down and listen. There's so much wisdom in there. There's so much urge toward healing in there, but we have to be a little brave to slow down and listen when we don't know what we're going to hear or see or feel. And that's why we need support, because it's really hard to do that alone.
Speaking of slowing down and listening, this is what another one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how do therapists navigate the trade-off, let's say, between presence and protocols in the therapy room? Like, how would you navigate that given your experience now for decades of doing this work?
Well, what I've discovered over the years is that less and less protocol, more and more listening. And then we may be called to do something, like because I have all this stuff around, in my therapy space. I have Santre available, I have collage stuff available, and that kind of thing. So if we feel moved to do something, we can. But it isn't that I ever begin, I think, anymore thinking I know better than my person that's with me what they need. I don't know. How would I know? I think it's such a burden on us that we're supposed to figure out what protocol to do. Like if you're anxious, you should do these three things. Well, no two people's anxiety is the same. And so it feels to me like I can't know and they will guide me. So to me, the foundation is presence. And as I'm listening as deeply as I can, which varies from day to day, it even varies by the time of day. Like I'm not as good at it in the middle of the afternoon. I'm not as available as I am in the morning or later in the afternoon. So now that I have the freedom that I'm not seeing people through the whole day, I don't see people during that time because I know I'm not as available. So I work at the other end. So anyway, so when we start with presence as the foundation, then we can begin to offer things to people and see how it sounds to them. So if we're just sharing as we might at the beginning, I usually say to people, what comes with you today? And they start telling me. And then I notice they're looking at the sand tray shells, and I might say, I'm wondering, are you feeling drawn to the sand tray? Check inside. See if that feels like where we should go. I just noticed your eyes were over there. And they might say, yeah, that feels right. Or they might say, no, this piece just was attracting my attention. And then I might say, would you want to go get it? Or they might bring it back. But I'm always referring back to them to check inside if it's what their system needs. So I would never offer a protocol without us sitting together and finding out what is needed. I also don't know very many protocols. I know about Sandtray from doing it more than anything else, and about collage because I did take a soul collage class and found it was really helpful. And we do a kind of inner work where we start with the body and then just listen inside and see what the body has to say about the implicit memory that may be coming up. I don't know any other protocols, honestly. I don't go to lots of trainings. I never have. And not that I'm against somebody knowing them, but if you lead with that, we cut our people off from their own inner wisdom. If I think I know, I'm cutting them off from listening to their inner wisdom.
So is it sort of almost like in the therapy room, you view yourself as almost a guide along with the person that you're in there with, and you're you're essentially helping that person to navigate their internal world, their internal system, where you're figuring this thing out together, but you're both on the same level. It's not like you're talking to them, you're with them, and you're exploring together and listening to what the system is coming up with or bringing up.
And I'm enormously curious about their inner world. I really love getting to know them at a deeper level. I really love it. And when they bring forth a child, a teenager, whatever it is, it's turned out to be pretty easy for me to just be fully involved and interested and caring of that one. And I think they feel that. And I don't know what that is in me, but I feel so drawn to these inner ones. And some of them are joyous, and most of them, though, are in a great deal of pain or fear or something. And I have a strong maternal sense about it, you know. And I know that they're internalizing that from me, but I'm not doing it because of that. I mean, I'm just grateful that it's just kind of there naturally to feel this tenderness toward these parts. And I think it's mainly because that's what I've received from these two therapists that I talked about, you know, one in my 40s and then one in my 60s. I've received immense tenderness and interest and care from both of these people. And that's what I get to pass on to others. Intergenerational healing.
And you did very well. Okay, one last question. Is there anything that you wish every parent knew implicitly before they had their first child?
Yeah, I would wish for every parent to have had enough either experiences of security in their own life or had been able to get the support that they need and the care that they need to be able to receive their child just as that child is with great curiosity, with great warmth, with such a sense of what a unique and special human this is, and feel that delight that they would have the resources inside to be able to do that. You know, we're having election season here, and our Democratic vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, has a neurodivergent son. And while Tim was giving his talk on night 3 of the convention, his son, who has several kinds of learning disabilities and things like that. And part of it seems like some emotions can really come up strongly. And as his dad was finishing, he burst out of his seat and was clapping and crying and going, "That's my dad." And it was absolutely beautiful to see that happen. And yet some people online began to say that he was weird and things like that. And what Tim and his wife Gwen say about it is what we discovered was our son had these difficulties, these various difficulties, and they're his superpower. And I thought, that's it. You see the beauty in your child, even when there's difficulties that the rest of the world would call difficulties. That's not what you see. You see this unique person who is going to manifest in this world in their own unique way, and you take such great joy and such love in it. That's what I wish we could all do as parents. We'd have a different world. We would have a different world.
For sure. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Bonnie. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed every minute of this conversation, as I always do speaking with you. Where would you send people after? There'll be a lot of therapists, a lot of mental health professionals listening to this. Where would you send them after this call to learn more about you, your work, perhaps your books?
Yeah, we have a website. Our little nonprofit is called Nurturing the Heart with the Brain in Mind, and our website is nurturingtheheart.org. And so you can find out all about us there. We offer year-long trainings in this because this way of being is so different from the way most of us are trained to be therapists. So we offer year-long trainings because you kind of have to sink into it, practice it, be with others, I think, to really get it. And so we offer those. And then I'm not teaching those any longer, but I have two, Karen Welch and Heidi Struble teach it, and they've been in this work. Gosh, I've known Karen for 25 years. Heidi, I've worked with for 10 or so years, and they are wonderful. So they carry the work in their bodies and transmit it beautifully. And then my wife and I teach a class that rides on the back of that. If you take the year long, we teach a class called Therapy of Spiritual Practice. And we do that 4 or 5 times a year. So those classes are available. We have also others on our 3 other people on our staff that are teaching some beautiful things as well. So we'd love to have you. The books are on there too. There's a page called resources, and the books are on there too. So
Okay. And your book, The Heart of Trauma, is a fantastic resource. I really recommend people check that out. Um, okay, Bonnie, I think whenever two people come together, there's always the metaphor I like to think about this is they're always sort of making music together, and I thoroughly enjoy making music with you. It flows really well, so it's always a delight. So I just want to wish you the best going forward, and
thank
uh,
you.
we'll talk
It was
soon.
delightful to be here. Thank you. I get the same feeling. It's always very enjoyable to do something with you. Thank you. Thank you for your work.